Now, I've got a rather difficult job this afternoon because I've got to talk about economics and entrepreneurship, but without being party political. So that's a little bit tricky, isn't it, really, given that we're 12 days away from a general election. But I think I'm allowed to make perhaps some big general comments. And I would say this. I think that our general election debate, frankly, becomes more trivial with every day that passes. We appear to be more concerned about what dress the leader's wife may be wearing, or how many kitchens each of the leaders have in their houses. And I've tried to inject some serious economic debate from time to time, but it isn't very easy. There is one absolutely enormous elephant in the room of this general election, and it's this. The coalition that was formed back in 2010, and you all remember those pictures of Dave and Nick in the sunshine, in the garden, and the forming of the coalition, and it had one very specific objective. The coalition was there to reduce the deficit by 2015 to zero. The deficit this year is still running at £90 billion. But the one issue that they absolutely won't talk about, and what I thought was particularly interesting when Jeremy Paxman grilled David Cameron, he asked him, how much in total have you as a government borrowed? And the Prime Minister replied, well, I'm sure you're going to tell me, Jeremy. Now, whether he knew or not, I honestly don't know. But when George Osborne became Chancellor, our national debt, which we've been building up for several centuries, was running at £850 billion. 5 years on, our national debt is now just touching £1.5 trillion. They have doubled the national debt in the space of 5 years. They have increased the national debt in 5 years by more than Gordon Brown managed to do in 13 years. And that, if you think about it, does take some doing. And yet there is no debate, there is no national debate about whether this issue matters or not. And my argument to you this afternoon is that actually this does matter. Because even with interest rates absolutely on the floor, even with that, our debt repayment is now already bigger than our defence budget and is set within a couple of years to be bigger than our education budget. I feel, our lack of responsibility, our lack of budgetary responsibility means that we are handing on to our children and to our grandchildren a really toxic legacy. Now, I'm not going to talk, as I say, in party political terms at all, but I'm going to give one or two suggestions as to things that I think we might be able to do that might just perhaps help us to get that annual deficit down and therefore not to be adding to the national debt so significantly every single year. It seems to me that we do need to make some significant cuts to spending, and that there are some other obvious places we could start. Let's take the foreign aid budget. How about that? This country now gives more money in foreign aid than any other Western country. It is something that our career political class, there I go again, I was trying not to, but it's something that actually in Westminster people view with tremendous pride. And yet I look at that foreign aid budget, I look at where the money goes, I look at the effect of it, and I conclude that in general foreign aid is a means by which we take money from poor people in rich countries to give it to rich people in poor countries. And I think much of it is incredibly badly spent. And I would like to see us cut, let's say, £10 billion a year from the foreign aid budget. Now that would be a start, wouldn't it, to genuine deficit reduction. I would also like to see us cut £10 billion a year, that is our current net contribution to the European Union. I don't see why we need to pay Brussels vast sums of money in order for them to sell us Mercedes motor cars, but perhaps that's a theme that I'll return to a little bit later on. I also take the view that the HS2 railway project is a gigantic white elephant that won't attract a penny of private investment. It started off, we were told it would cost £35 billion, then it became £40 billion. Then it became £45 billion, now it's £50 billion. It could be 55 or 60 or 70. Who knows where this ends? But actually, just to benefit 6% of the peak travelling public in this country, I don't think justifies a bill of up to £70 billion. And no doubt there are one or two here from Manchester and cities like that who've been told that if we build HS2, actually it'll bring a big economic boost to the north. Well, just look at the example in France. When the TGV was built, and by the way, HS2 is costing 9 times per mile to build what the TGV cost. But if you look at what the TGV did, the link between Paris and Marseille was 6 hours, and with the TGV it became 3 hours. Did that mean Marseille benefited economically? No. What it meant was a lot of companies in Marseille actually relocated to Paris. So I'd cut £4 billion a year from the HS2 budget. And the other area which appears to be controversial is that in the wake of the Scottish terror in the referendum last September, a pledge was made. A pledge was made that the Barnett formula, as it's known, would continue. And under that Barnett formula, the English taxpayer continues to shovel billions of pounds over Hadrian's Wall every year so that the Scots can enjoy free prescription charges and that their youngsters don't have to pay tuition fees. And I think in a modern day United Kingdom, in a post-devolution United Kingdom, that actually the English deserve a rather better deal. And so I would cut the Barnett formula, and by the end of this Parliament that would save a further £5 billion a year. So there you are, folks. My ideas. There's £32 billion a year that we could cut from the annual deficit without this affecting a single front-line service. But I do think that when we talk about growth, perhaps we are ever so slightly deluding ourselves. We're told everything's fine, the economy's fixed because we have growth. But actually that growth is stimulated by running massive annual budget deficits. You know, those of you here that are IFAs, and I know there are many of you, I mean, if your clients go out and max out their credit cards for the next three months in a row, they will have a better standard of living. But at some point, they've got to pay back the bill. And that, I fear, is what we've done. And I think we've forgotten something. We've forgotten something that we saw in the 1980s that worked in this country, and I think which worked spectacularly in the United States of America. We've forgotten about the dynamic ability and effect of cutting people's taxes. There was already a massive problem in Britain that a lot of people, a lot of young couples who work on not particularly high income and have to pay for childcare find themselves little better off than those that choose not to work. And my ideas would be that nobody on the minimum wage would pay tax, that we would lift the level at which people pay 40p tax. And remember, that was, for 25 years, the top rate of tax, and yet that now takes in senior staff nurses. It now takes in experienced police officers. So I would up the level at which people pay 40p tax to £55,000 a year, And I would, for those people in the middle, earning between 45 and 55,000 a year, introduce a new 30p rate of tax. By doing these things, we would give people genuine tax cuts. We would put more money in their pockets. And I would also, while I'm at it, and this will upset people in this room who are busy with the trust industry, who won't love me for this, but I would completely abolish inheritance tax, because it seems to me that actually the very rich don't pay it anyway, and that now it is people living in semi-detached houses in London who would very much like their children or grandchildren to get onto the property ladder by what they leave them that are now caught by this tax. So what I'm proposing here, folks, is an £18 billion a year tax cut, and a tax cut that I believe would lead to genuine dynamic growth within the British economy. But we do have a big problem when we look and talk about business in this country. I'm afraid that the interests of the giant corporates, the interests of the big multinationals, the relationship between big banks, big business and big politics have left us, I think, in a world where actually the odds are stacked against the individual small and medium-sized entrepreneur. Now, much of this comes from our relationship with the European Union. But I am struck that there are some simple things that could be done to help small businesses. And bear in mind, there are 5 million men and women out there, many in this room, 5 million of you that run small businesses, create 12 million jobs in the private sector and pay a very great deal of tax. And I genuinely think the time has come for there to be a cut in business rates, a cut of up to 20% in business rates, up to a rateable value of £20,000 a year, and that would give a £1 billion boost every year for our high streets. But the small businesses also find themselves in this world dominated by corporates, increasingly with a problem of late payments. There are something like £20 billion right at the moment that is owed to SMEs by big companies. And I think we need to try to do something about that. And I would suggest a system where an SME could go to HMRC and confidentially, rather than going through the lawyers, which costs a fortune and takes a lot of time, where a small business could go to HMRC and say, look, these people aren't playing fair. And if it happened that several complaints came in about a big company, then HMRC would go into that firm and open up their books. So some simple little ideas as to what we can do for small business. Now, I understand that Jim Millen this morning has talked at some length about energy. But here is another massive problem where we've burdened British business. We have fallen in love, apparently, with wind energy. Now, I have to say that I haven't fallen in love with wind energy. I think these giant bat and bird chomping monsters are despoiling England's green and pleasant land and our seascape. But that's purely a subjective comment, perhaps, from me. But what we've done is we've lumped on now over 10% on our energy bills, and with the future increases that are written into the system, that will be 20% by 2020. So at the very same time as the Americans went for shale gas and as India and China went for coal, we have gone for expensive electricity. And for many manufacturing companies, actually the electricity bill, the energy bill, is even bigger than their wage salary bill. So I would want to end immediately all subsidy for wind energy, and for us to find